tactile muscle of the back. What you're about to look at is graphic, so if you made a mistake in clicking this video, I suggest you stop it. Anyway, let's start. To start, we know there's 3 systems to the back, the muscles of the back. I'm just going to quickly mention a few other random muscles that we have here. Example here, we have the serratus dorsalis cranialis. So if you look at my tutorial about muscles of the forelimb, remember there's the serratus ventralis here. Okay, this is the sling muscle that supports the thorax between the 2 limbs. So it's fan shaped. So just to make the difference, serratus ventralis, serratus dorsalis cranialis. Okay, because this is more dorsal than this one. So this is the dorsalis and this is the ventralis. What else do we have? Here we have, this is your external abdominal oblique. Okay, you could see the fibers run caudoventrally, that direction. And I'm just going to mention a quick, so you can see some of this specimen is kind of in bad shape, kind of moldy. Here we have the extensor, external intercostal, and underneath the internal intercostal. So the external intercostals have the same direction of fibers as the external abdominal oblique. Okay, this, like I said, is caudoventral, and so do the external intercostals. They also have the caudoventral direction of fibers. If we look at the internal intercostals, they actually run the other way. They run cranioventrally. Okay, caudoventrally, cranioventrally. These are muscles of inspiration. Next, I need some ribs. Just look a little closer, and you'll see them. On the more ventral aspect, so I just raised the limb. Here we have the scalenus muscle. I'm just going to mention this muscle because I find it important. So your scalenus. And this tiny little spindle-shaped muscle, that's actually your rectus thoracis. Okay, rectus thoracis, and this is your scalenus here. Alright, I guess we can start with the back muscles. So I'm going to reflect the serratus dorsalis cranialis. There's actually a caudal part to this because this is the cranial part. Caudal part is often here, but sometimes it's hard to find. It's kind of intertwined with fascia, and I couldn't really find it in this specimen. But there is a general caudal part to the serratus dorsalis. We'll reflect that. So as we know, there's 3 parts to the back. There's the iliocostalis system, the longissimus system, and the transversospinalis system. Let's start with the most lateral. That is your iliocostalis. If you get confused with which one is which, think iliocostalis. I think that's how I remember it. Costal. Costal means ribs. It's kind of closer to the ribs. I don't know why that makes sense in my head, but it does. It reminds me that it's the most lateral one. So the iliocostalis system spans from the length of your ilium all the way to your thorax. Okay? So it has 3 parts. The lumbar part, okay, which is that's your lumbar part, iliocostalis lumborum. Then when you get to the ribs, this is your thoracic part, your thoracis, iliocostalis thoracis, and then there's a tiny little spindle-shaped strand, which we can't really see, unfortunately, but it's one of these tiny little ones that go to the cervical vertebrae, and that's your cervicis. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find it in this specimen, but it's present. It's one of these tiny little spindle-shaped muscles that go to your cervical vertebrae. So technically, it really has just 2 parts, but there's 3 that we can't see. The way you remember it, it's unique because it has these little tendons, shiny tendons. And when you see that, you always know that's your iliocostalis thoracis. Also remember, there's no specific demarcation where these muscles start and end. Just you have to have an idea. Obviously, if it's thoracic, it's in the general thorax region, so where your thoracic cage is, and then your lumborum is in the lumbar region, so in your abdominal area here. All right, so that's for your iliocostalis lumborum. Let's move on to the next one, which is kind of the sandwiched in between the two, is your longissimus system. Okay, sandwiched between your iliocostalis and your transverso spinalis system, your longissimus. So longissimus has a few parts. First of all, it has the longissimus lumborum, which is the lumbar part, and then you move up here, and this is your longissimus thoracis. Okay, the length of the thorax. After the thoracis, we have the cervicis. This is where it gets a little complicated. Cervicis, and then the catidus, which is this flap-like muscle, flat, and goes to your head. Okay, so this is the cervicis. You can kind of tell it apart because it kind of fans out a little bit. So you can see that. So here, I'm going to put the forceps for the demarcation between the iliocostalis and the longissimus system. So the longissimus here, you can see it kind of fans out and goes to your cervical vertebrae, and then out of nowhere comes this capital part here that goes to the head. Okay. Also, this specimen has been really cleaned up. I've removed a lot of fat from it. So one of the first things you want to do when you get a specimen and you're doing the back, especially in dogs that are a little overweight, there's going to be a lot of fat on it, so you really have to clean and remove a lot of fat. I suggest use forceps for that. Do not use blades. They often cut into muscle when you're not expecting it. Forceps are a great tool to remove fat, and so are scissors. Okay, now on to the transverso spinalis system. So this is the most medial system. Here I can feel along my spinous processes of the vertebrae. So the transverso spinalis is right next to them. It borders that. Okay, you can see it here. Right next to it is the longissimus system, transverso spinalis. So the transverso spinalis has a lumborum part, and then it gets here and it's a little different. First of all, we're going to look at the splenius, which is a flat muscle you can't miss. It's really flat. It lies underneath your rhomboideus. So if you remember, this is the rhomboideus, and then we have a few other muscles on top, like the cervical part of the brachiocephalicus, the clado cervicalis, that I've removed. I removed the rhomboideus here, popped it, and underneath you have your splenius. So it's kind of flat. The way I remember it is it looks like a spleen because the spleen is kind of flat. Not to mix it up with the scalenus, which is what I just showed you before on the thorax, on the ventral thorax. This is your splenius, that's your scalenus. So this is your splenius, move it, and underneath you have two muscles, which are known as the semispinalis capitis together. Just for reference, this muscle here is what we just looked at. It's the capitis part of the longissimus system. So I spread that and the splenius apart to see the semispinalis capitis. Semispinalis capitis has two parts, the complexus and the biventer. So here we can see this is your biventer and your complexus. You know this is your biventer because it has very characteristic aponeurosis in the muscles. Can you see that? It's like these thin white streaks in the muscle. So that's your biventer. And then next to it is your complexus. So the way I remember it is the biventer is not complexed, and the complexus is not complexed. Sorry, did I mix that up? The complexus is not complexed. Completely erase what I just said. The biventer is complexed. Complexed by meaning it's got these streaks. It's kind of, I don't know, a way to remember that the complexus doesn't have these. Okay, it's just a simple muscle. Now, if you part these two underneath, you're going to have this elastic fiber